Melissa, do you want to get started?
Yes. Hello, my name is Melissa Daggett. I was born and raised in New Orleans. I graduated from LSU in political science, and I hold two master's degrees from the University of New Orleans in education and history. While studying for my master's in history at UNO, I became very interested in the free people of color in New Orleans. And I'm here to introduce my book published by LSU Press. I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about Eugene and Eulalie, a family saga of love, race, and property in 19th century New Orleans. So I use the lives of Eulalie Mandeville and Eugene Macarty as a framework to illustrate the history of New Orleans and the battles that the free people of color fought. Eugene and Eulalie is a what I call a dual micro history, which is the use of the experiences and mentalities of historical people that were obscure to better understand the social and political forces during their lifetime. The court case, which forms a large part of the book, is an allegory for the broader issues affecting the culture. The fascinating story of Eugene Macarty and Eulalie Mandeville encapsulates the larger social, economic, and legal issues of the time. And I took kind of a different approach to the book than other historical books. I kind of start at the middle of the book. So I start talking about the lawsuit, and it begins with Eulalie Mandeville about to enter the court to defend herself against her partner's brother who had filed the lawsuit. So I'm going to begin sharing a PowerPoint. Okay, can you see that?
Perfect.
Okay, all right. So it begins with her standing by the presbytere. This is called the presbytere today, which houses the Louisiana State Museum. But back then, it housed several courts plus the Louisiana State Supreme Court. And this was on the morning of November 4th, 1846, where she's contemplating, what was going to transpire during the case. So the battle was not just about her, but more so about her children and grandchildren and potential inheritance. So one thing that's important to note is who controlled Louisiana. So most of the book talks about what was going on during early American years, but Eulalie Mandeville herself was born in during the Spanish regime, 1774, and then she looks back on her ancestors, her white ancestors, and so I go back to the French regime, which started in 1682, and I talk about her ancestors that first came from Canada, and that was Francois Marigny de Mandeville, and he arrived in Biloxi in 1702. Biloxi at that time was the capital of Louisiana. And then later on, he moved to New Orleans, which by then was the capital of Louisiana. And he started an elite, prestigious family that endured for many generations. As a result of prestigious military positions, connections to the French and Spanish ruling elite, advantageous matrimonial alliances, and real estate savvy, resulting in vast empires of plantations, the Marigny family was among the Creole elite. So her father was a descendant of Francois, the original Marigny de Mandeville, and that would have been actually his grandfather. and he had a child with a slave on his plantation. He donated the child, this would be Eulalie, to his mother, and that mother would be her grandmother. And she was raised by the grandmother on the plantation. She was raised as if she was part of the family. So that was, and the donation was in 1777. But 2 years later, she, the grandmother, manumitted Eulalie. So by 1777, when she was, rather 1779, she was a free person, but she continued living on the plantation. So it's important to know during what regime we're talking about, because there were different laws in regards to slavery and manumission. The Spanish crown actually encouraged self-purchase to foster the growth of the free people of color. And why did they do this? Well, several reasons. One was they wanted to fill in kind of this middle level of economic roles in society. They also wanted to use some of the free men of color to defend the colony from both foreign and domestic foes. And also, they felt like this was a way to kind of tamp down on insurrections, because if people knew that they could eventually be free, then they would be less likely to cause an insurrection. So this increases the free people of color population. Now, the most well-known of the Macartys was Bernard Macarty. He was Eulalie's half-brother and founder of Father Macarty. He had a lifetime relationship with his sister. From all indications, they got along very well, both during their childhood and their adulthood. There is also an indication that the father, Pierre Macarty, had a connection with her as well. During the court case, some letters were introduced. There were actually copies of letters that he wrote to her during the 1790s. Now, she, while she was on the plantation, began a marriage-like relationship with Eugène Macarty. Eugène Macarty lived in a nearby plantation. And Bernard Macarty recounted during the court case how Eugène would cross the Mississippi River to see Eulalie. This was in the early 1790s. But of course, they couldn't get married. There were laws, even under the Spanish, against interracial marriage. So the Macartys, like the Macartys, were part of this elite, this colonial elite that spanned the French and Spanish regimes and continued on during the early American years. The two elite families paralleled each other in Louisiana history. The couple had 7 children. 2 of them did not live to adulthood, but there were 5 that did. And Eugène Macarty recognized the 5 children. Now, there were 2 ways to do this. One way was to, when the child was baptized, to sign the register in the margin, which he did do for all 5 children. And occasionally his name appears in the entry as well. A second way was to have a notary act done where you would recognize the child. In this case, all 5 were recognized. The children were considered to be natural. Now, this is a weird expression because, hey, of course they were natural. They were living and breathing. But natural here has a special legal meaning. It means that the child was born outside of marriage, but at the same time was recognized by the father. By doing that, the children potentially could gain part of the estate, up to maybe 1/4 of the estate. They couldn't gain the whole estate at all, even if there were no other children. So these were the different ways you could do it. Now, how did this couple make money? Eulalie Mandeville, while she was still on the plantation in St. Bernard Parish, began selling dry goods to what was called the Spanish girls, which I assume were the Isleños, because there was a colony of Isleños nearby in St. Bernard Parish. And she used them later on, she used enslaved women and free women of color to market her dry goods in the streets of New Orleans. And she was extremely successful. Free women of color and enslaved women dominated the street vending market sector in New Orleans during the colonial and early American years. One contemporary observed that in every street during the whole day, women, chiefly Black women, are met carrying the baskets on their heads and calling at houses. For generations, marketing had been an important source of income for enslaved women who used their free day on Sunday to hawk coffee, fruit, and callus, a traditional sweet cake. In the court case, one witness noticed that Eulalie sometimes had one, sometimes two, and sometimes three slaves following her with goods to sell. A neighbor said Eulalie had 5 to 10 enslaved sellers and an additional 8 to 10 free women of color working on commission. So it varied from witness to witness how many women were actually participating in this. But we do know it was a combination of the two, the enslaved and the free women of color. Eulalie used some of this money that she earned and gave this to Eugene. And there were, again, a number of witnesses who saw this happen. Plus, there were actual documentation. So Eugene lent this money at very high rates, maybe as high as 20%. This is how he made the money. But bear in mind that he initially got the money from Eulalie. So this went on for several decades. But then, as we all know, people get old. And in 1845, the union of Eugene and Eulalie was more than half a century old, and Eugene Macarty had reached the advanced age of 76. So at this point, they decided to do something about the inheritance. So apparently, he wanted the children to get more than 1/4. So there was a money transfer in October of $111,000. So, which was a lot of money. I mean, even today, that's a lot of money. But back then, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars. So there was this money transfer in early October. But then 19 days later, Eugene and Eulalie married in St. Augustine Church. That would be October the 22nd, as you can see on the slide, by the vicar Charles Moulard. And this was just 3 days prior to Eugene's death. So when you try to get a document from the archdiocese, they sent a printout. So I got that, but I still had questions about who the witnesses were, and I felt like I wanted the actual document. So they supplied the actual document for me, and you can see here. Okay, so this is who got married, and then the witnesses sign. And here's Eulalie's signature, and that's Eugene Macarty's. And I think he could barely sign his name. And then comes the witnesses that I was very interested in. So one of the witnesses was a neighbor, one was a friend, one was a nephew, but the most interesting thing for me was the fourth witness. The fourth witness could not sign her name. So the vicar wrote her name out and you can barely read it, Jean-Marie du Tillieu, and then there's an X. So we know the person could not write. But that was the same first two names of Eulalie's mother, Jean-Marie. And over here, there's an X as well. And instead of writing out the mother's name, it says the other part is in French, and then there's X. So all of that points to the mother actually attending the marriage, which is very strange for me because she would have been in her 90s. And I have no other uh, way to explain it other than it was the mother. But like I said, this is why I wanted to get the original document. And so that did help me out quite a bit. So what happened to her? We don't know. I did a lot of research and didn't really come up with anything, even with that last name. We do know that she had one other child, a little bit younger than Eulalie. I don't know exactly what happened to that child as well. So then, because of that money transfer, Nicholas Théodore Macarty filed suit against Eulalie Mandeville. Now, this was the surviving sibling. He was a little bit younger than Macarty, Eugène Macarty, and et al. Indicates there were other plaintiffs. In fact, there were quite a lot of other plaintiffs, which I'll show you in a minute. So the full citation is Nicholas Theodore Macarty et al. Versus Eulalie Mandeville, f.w.c. So the f.w.c. stands for Free Women of Color. Sometimes he used his middle name and sometimes he used his first name. So it kind of went back and forth. So the case was litigated over 18 months in two different courts. As I said earlier, the first court was the Second District Court of Orleans Parish, and then later on it was appealed to the Louisiana State Supreme Court. This is the actual case, all right, on the slide. That is the actual case. Now, when I did my research, I downloaded it and printed it out, and an amazing 363 pages, which is pretty incredible. But I still wanted to see the case. I wanted to see what it actually looked like. So the archivist at the Earl K. Long Library allowed me to see the actual case. So it was amazing to see it, to be able to look through it. The documentation was the same that I saw online, but it was just a different experience to actually see it and touch it. And so this is the case. And the case went on for months and months and months. The crux of the civil suit rested upon the collateral heirs' assertion that Eulalie Mandeville had defrauded them of their rightful inheritance. In other words, that money transfer shouldn't have been done. The plaintiffs based this allegation on legal grounds, financial records, and the belief that Eugène Macarty and not Eulalie Mandeville was the dominant economic partner. They argued that Eulalie was a concubine and could inherit no more than 1/10 of Eugène's estate, and his natural children could inherit no more than 1/4. And let me go back to that word, concubine. That word was used repeatedly in the court case, and it's in actually the legal civil codes as well. Of course, the most damning piece of evidence was that money transfer just a few weeks before he died. The plaintiffs considered the money transfer a donation inter vivos, a donation made to circumvent the state laws made and established by the Louisiana Civil Code of 1825. So let me get back to the plaintiffs. So here they are. Wow, quite a lot. So initially, the judge ordered a kind of like a family, what we call a family tree or genealogical tree, and a notary did that work. This isn't actually the notary's one, um, but under each name, it was indicated what portion that plaintiff would receive is successful. The most any of them could receive would be 1/7. That was Nicholas Macarty because there were seven siblings, and but the other siblings had passed away. He was the only surviving one. Um, but if somebody had passed away and had children, they could potentially inherit some money. So it goes down from a sibling, children, grandchildren, and even great grandchildren. And the lowest amount would have been 1/420th of the estate if they had been successful. So there were 46 collateral heirs. And collateral heir is somebody who would not be an ascendant like a father or mother and would not be a descendant like a son or daughter or grandchild. The collateral heir could be a brother or sister or a niece or a nephew or possibly cousins too. So these are the collateral heirs that filed suit. And then the case went on for quite a while, and the court rendered their decision on June 12th, 1847. So the judge was named Cannon, Judge Cannon. His nickname was Pocket Pistol. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of Pocket Pistol. I would have loved to have pictures of him. But he rendered his decision and he used the Spanish law prior to 1803, the Louisiana Civil Code prior to 1825, and testimony supporting the defendant's claim of being the dominant economic partner. And there was also a sympathetic nod to the interests of the children rather than the 46 collateral heirs. So he rendered the decision in favor of Eulalie, but the sibling that had brought suit, Nicholas Macarty, filed it again in the Louisiana State Supreme Court. And I'm going to let you read the book to find out what happens next. So, Eulalie Mandeville, I'm going to stop sharing right now. Yeah. So, Eulalie Mandeville died after the Louisiana State Supreme Court decision months of each other. Eulalie Mandeville died, let me see, I have the exact date. October the 20th, Hill Cottage on Dauphine Street, where she had lived for decades. She was buried later on in St. Louis Cemetery, and she was interred in the same tomb as her lifetime partner, Eugène Macarty. So they were reunited after death. So open now for questions. I'm sorry. Before the questions start, I'd like to show the book once again. It's a beautiful design and just a little explanation what it is. This is the background. That's where Bernard Macarty lived. His father lived there as well prior to his death, Pierre. Um, of course, his source of wealth was to sell the property that he inherited from his father. So this is a print from 1820. At this time, it was no longer, acres and acres and acres of land owned that was vacant. Now it was land that was occupied by a lot of them by the free people of color. Bernard Macarty sold a lot of his land to the free people of color, and this was something very affordable. Now, who were that had moved from New Orleans? So that's what the picture's about. So I'm open for
Thank you so much for that, Melissa. I think we had a little bit of technical difficulties for a second, so if anyone is having any issues hearing me or Melissa, just let us know in the chat because I think that we're back now. I do
okay.
I do want to thank everyone for tuning in today, and to remind you that if you have a question for Melissa, just put it in the chat and we'll ask her live. And let's get started. I wanted to start, Melissa, by asking you a little bit about the research for this book. Can you tell me, like, what were some of the difficulties that you encountered? Obviously, this being a case that is, a couple hundred years old at this point.
Well, the case formed, the primary documents, obviously, and but I had to do more research. Did a lot of reading, secondary sources, and then primary sources. Um, I decided that one way to go was to go to the Williams Research Center, and I looked under Jean Beau's letters to Saint James. This is called a Saint James collection. And this sounds odd why I would do that, but I had a feeling that he lived during that same time period that he would know the McCarthys and there would be comments about the McCarthys. And sure enough, I was right. And at one point, he lived, John Bowes, I'm talking about, Boze. He lived in Cuba and he ran into Eugene Macarty there. And so that helped me a lot. And it established the fact that Eugene Macarty had gone to Cuba. Now, by this time, two of the adult children had moved to Cuba. So there was kind of like a reverse immigration to a very small extent. So some people moved to Cuba and started like coffee plantations. So he was there in the early 1820s. And going back to what I previously showed you in a slide, there was a slide where he acknowledged his children. And that was right before he left and went to Cuba. So maybe he was worried about something might happen to the boat or whatever, something might happen to him in Cuba. But he was in Cuba about a year to help out his children. So that was one bit of information I got from Jean Bose. But then after later on, he moved back to um, the New Orleans and he encountered Eugene Macarty again. So that was a nice source of information. I got a lot of the information from wills and other court cases, and of course, those are primary documents. Uh, I got information from the Notarial Archives of New Orleans, which you did see one thing there, but I got a lot of information about Bernard Maroney's financial transactions and about Eulalie's transactions and Eugene Macarty's transactions. Uh, so that's a very, very rich source of information. Um, and that kind of like sums up what I found.
You mentioned that two of Eugene and Eulalie's descendants had moved to Cuba. Is there what else do we know about their descendants?
Well, that was kind of hard. I well,
Melissa, you're cutting out for you're cutting out. Would you mind just
um,
starting over that response?
but yeah, I see something about the internet's a little shaky. Um, so it was very difficult because it's hard to research Cuba because it's not easy because it's a communist country now. But I did find information, like I said, from the Jean Beau's letters, and I did find some information on secondary sources. It was difficult to find primary sources. I did also have to go to the court case. And so basically, what happened was the two children, this would be the daughter and a son, moved to Cuba. Each of them had children there. Um, and they lived on these coffee plantations, which initially did very well in the 1820s, but it was all downhill after that because of climate change and other type of things going on. And they apparently the brother of or sorry, let me just say the son did change over to sugar and tobacco and got out of coffee. But the letters were beseeching Eugene Macarty for more money, and he stopped giving them more money. He felt like he was just wasting it away, and he just stopped it there. The letters were kind of interesting because one of the things the son, but Bartholomew, complained about was that he had to sell his slaves, and he was afraid they were going to come back and take more slaves. So this shows that they were slave owners over in Cuba. There's also some primary documents that show that they said they were recognized as being white and not mixed race or black. So um, anyway, that's basically what I was doing as far as Cuba, which was a difficult chapter to write.
I'd like to talk a little bit more actually about Eulalie's participation in purchasing and owning slaves. Can you say, was that unique for free people of color in South Louisiana at the time, or was it not?
I think it was very common. It was very common. And there's actually like three theories about why free people of color would own slaves, because in many instances, these people were at one time slaves themselves. So there's this one theory, and I think this is partially true, though. Well, I know it's true, is that some free people of color uh, bought other people so that they could be actually free. They were called officially slaves. And this relates to an age where free people, or rather enslaved people, could be manumitted, and that was 30. So let's say one of the masters frees a slave, but they're not 30 years old. They they still have to be slaves. So they possibly sell it to another free person of color until they were 30, and then they would be free. Sometimes slaves were freed and the last will, but if they were under 30, they still couldn't be free. They had to wait till they were 30 years old. So that's one thing that could have happened. The other one, and I think this theory is a little strange, though, it said that free people of color like to own slaves because it kind of put them above other free people of color, put them like in another status, and they were closer to the white community. Um, I, I'm not sure that's really true. And then we come to the third thing, and that's owning slaves helped out the free people of color. They used these slaves for obviously working at home. Many times they rented the slaves out. So that was a source of income for them. And that had to be what happened for Eulalie. In 1830, Eulalie Mandeville and had there were 30 slaves, I'm sorry, 20 slaves at her house, or at least on the census, and seven males and 13 females. That would correlate to what I said earlier about females um, doing the vending business. And obviously, all of those people couldn't be relatives. So I think they did use um, enslaved people. Uh, Oftentimes, they would free them in their wills, or maybe they would manumit them before they passed away. But that's the third theory, and that's more than likely what it was. Now, maybe they weren't treated as poorly as slaves were treated by other masters, uh, but I think I covered the question, and that's also in my book too. I talk about that in my book. But it's a
Yeah,
thorny question. Why would somebody, a free woman of color, a free man of color, have slaves?
no, thank you for your response. And Lawrence, I see your question in the chat. Thank you. Sorry I missed that earlier, and I'll go ahead and ask that now. Lawrence wanted to know a little bit about like women's legal rights in Louisiana. And so these are some concepts I'm not super familiar with that he's mentioning. So sorry if I'm not saying it right, but he'd like to ask about head and master laws, and if you found any overlap with Myra Clark Gaines or Manuel Lopez, who was a lawyer, slave appraiser of New Orleans and signer of the West Florida Republic Declaration. Does any of that ring a bell?
What was the first part? I didn't quite hear you.
Um, he was interested in if there were head and master laws. I
Oh,
think
I'm
referring here
not
to women's
familiar
legal
with that
rights.
terminology. I'm not familiar with at all with that terminology. Um, Terminology they used was like what I mentioned earlier, concubine. Concubine appears quite a bit in the case, and also it's in the laws of that era. Uh, I personally don't like that term, but that's what they use. Um, so I'm not saying.
Well, yes, sorry about that, Lawrence, if we didn't get your question right, but I would like to ask a follow-up question that is related, which is about women's rights during this time. Um, Obviously, Eulalie is a free person of color, but she's also a woman in 1800s
Yeah.
Louisiana. I'm curious if to what extent was she in charge of not the estate, because obviously there was a legal battle about this, but the own fortune that she made in the dry goods business.
Well, she did have her own account, her own bank account. Her oldest son helped her out with that. It looked like this is Eugene McCarthy's oldest son, who shares the same name, and so, in some ways, actually, free women of color had more rights than white women. And maybe this is kind of going back to that question you just said, because white women that didn't have control of their money, that would have been the husband had control. So at least they had control, economic control of their life, and they were able to buy property. They were able to have a business like Eulalie Mandeville, and they were able to move freer than at times white women. White women were more under the control uh, of the husband. And once again, maybe that's what the other question was referring to. So that she had, in some ways, it was more advantageous for her not to be married.
Right, right. I'd like to maybe um, switch gears a little bit and talk about La Creole, which is an organization that you're a member of. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Oh yeah. Oh, yes, I got mine. All right. So I am the secretary of La Creole, and I am the editor of the journal called La Creole. And this is an organization that is involved with maintaining the legacy and researching the lives of people's ancestors, the free people of color, especially around New Orleans, but it could be outside of the New Orleans area. Um, so I am the editor, and it comes out annually. Um, and we publish things related to, so just to give you an example, here's title of one article: Women's Roles in the 1811 Slave Roll Revolt. And here's another one. This one is about the man on the cover, our cover person, and that was Dr. Louis Charles Roudanet at 10. Looks pretty good, doesn't he? So, anyway, that's La Creole. If you're interested, you can go to lacreo.org and get more information and find out how to join. We have an annual conference in October that's coming up in October. And that'll be in New Orleans at Xavier University, October the 17th, I believe. And the day before, they're having a conference with Louisiana Archivists and Manuscripts Organization, Association. So it'll be in the same spot in Xavier.
Yeah, make sure to send that to us, and we'll post it on our socials.
Well, I'm sure
Seems
they
really
would
cool.
love to have that.
I want to thank you so much for being here with us today, Melissa, and I also want to thank everyone for tuning in the chat. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. This is the last question I'm going to ask you, Melissa, which is a standard last question that we ask our authors, which is what are you working on now? Like what's next after Eugene and Eulalie?
Well, I'm going out of my comfort zone upon the advice of some friends, and I'm working on an historical fiction book based on, in part, on my two books. So the plot is going to involve battles that enslaved people and free people of color faced in the mid 19th century New Orleans. And I discuss, of course, these things in Eugene and Eulalie. And then spiritualism and voodoo were important elements in my first book, Spiritualism in 19th Century New Orleans, The Life and Times of Henry Louis Ray. And so there'll be some surreal paranormal events that the protagonist encounters in New Orleans during the 1860s and 1870s. And we all know people love voodoo and spiritualism. So that's in the early stages. Mhm.
That sounds great. We're looking forward to that. I definitely would
Yeah,
read that one.
yeah.
Well, that's all we got for today. Thanks again, everyone. Melissa, before we go, is there anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I would like to thank LSU Press, their staff, and of course you're included, for making my book project a reality and for helping to market it. And I'd like to thank the attendees for viewing my presentation.
All right, that's all we've got for today. Thanks again.
Okay.